Coming up on this episode of the Almost Falls podcast.
One of them lost their balance and the whole pyramid fell, and they were 50 feet in the air. It was terrifying, and the news crews were all there. We didn't know if our team was even going to survive. It was probably one of the hardest points in my career.
Hello and welcome back to the Almost Falls podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today our guest is Khera. She was a circus performer for 20 years and shares the harsh reality of the circus industry, as well as the dangers that are associated with it. I learned a lot, and I know you will too. So let's get right into the story with Khera.
I had really severe undiagnosed ADHD.
Okay.
And that made schoolwork really, really hard. So when I was like, I can make money doing circus, that's so much better than having to go to college. For me, at least. So I didn't go to college. I ended up just performing.
How was it with your parents at such a young age? Were they supportive of that, first of all? And how was it when you finally made the jump to being professional? Because that's a very uncommon path and it could have a lot of pushback with parents. How was it for you?
Well, I feel like that was one of my biggest advantages growing up and starting my career, is that my parents were extremely supportive. My mother would stay home with me and homeschool me while my dad worked, but then my dad ended up quitting his job and becoming a coach full-time at the Sailor Circus where I performed. He was the unicycle coach there for 10 years. And because he had a background in carpentry and welding and stuff, he was actually my circus equipment manufacturer. Oh. He built my trapeze, he built my Roman rings, he built all my equipment, my frames and stuff that I would swing off of. So, and then he was the one that held my safety line. So whenever I would go on a show for trapeze or something, he went with me because he was my rigger and my manager. So my dad pretty much quit his job to support my career, and he made circus equipment, and he started his own circus equipment business. He really loved teaching people and coaching, and so he had a successful unicycle club for a good long time, 5 or 6 years. And this unicycle club brought a lot of people together, and he ended up getting a lot of contacts and sold a lot of circus equipment. So that was his way of making money while I performed, so he could support my career and still make money while he was at it.
That's really cool that your dad was supportive and he was actually with you and helping you along the way. That's I really love to hear that. That's really cool. I wanted to ask you about how the life of being a circus performer was, because there's shows all over the country, I imagine, or at least over a large area. And there's probably really good points about it, but there's probably parts that are really hard. So can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. The circus life is very unique compared to other life. The circus world is everybody knows everybody. So it's very tight knit, which is really great because when you go on a show, you almost likely know that person. A lot of people think that when they think of circus, they think of just a juggling and a clown and one circus show for your whole life and doing one act. But it's not like that. Circus performers, they'll each show every year or twice a year will put different acts. So you bounce from different shows. So I would do all sorts of different shows. I've worked on the Big Apple Circus, Circus Sarasota, the Nicolinda's Circus. I did a lot of smaller shows and spot dates, we'd call them, and stuff. There was a lot of traveling around. The hardest part is training for a new act. Whenever we would do our high wire act, we would train for 6 months before we would start performing. And during those 6 months, you're not performing, so you're not getting paid. And so that's why we get paid a whole lot more for the shows, even though we're not doing as much. It's 1 to 3 shows a day, 4 days a week usually, 5 days at the most. And then you just did. So you only work 3 hours at the most, and you're on it actually performing for 10 minutes a day, but you get paid a whole lot more. It's because they're paying you for the time you train. So we would train 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, 6 days a week for 6 months before we go to a show, because you have to do the act so many times and get so good that you can do it in front of people and not fail and not keep losing your tricks or stuff like that. So it's a lot of training. And even then we'd find a show, I would get hired for a show, so I'd train for that show. And then when we get to the show, Um, Depending on where the show's located, depends on where you live during the show. So a lot of the times, if it's like a tent show, you'll live in trailers in the back. So I've lived in
Okay.
trailers, or if it's in like a theater show, like or something like that. Like sometimes we'll work at theaters inside casinos. Then we get a hotel room. So it's very I don't know. You live in small quarters most of the time, and then you hop a lot. Like I'll perform on one show for 4 months and I'll do another show for like 3 months. So the harder part is not being in one spot for very long. So I don't get to like have a house. A lot of times I would just not have a house because I'd be traveling so much. And the hard part is when you have like a few months usually off during the year where that's where you're building your act, your training and stuff like that. So during those 3 to 6, not six, like 3 months usually that you're during the winter months usually when it's cold everywhere, so there's not many shows. You need enough money saved up from the previous year of shows so that you can live off of that money while you're not getting paid. So you have to be strategic about the way you get paid. The way you get paid too is much different than like a normal job. A normal job, you're usually paid like a salary or you're paid hourly.
Hmm.
For the circus, you're not paid hourly. It would be like $1,000 an hour or something weird like that. But you're usually paid per week, and then if it's like a spot date, you're paid per show, and that depends on the price on what level you are on. But the good thing about it is, even though you're traveling a lot, you make really, really good friends because everybody in the circus knows everybody. So whenever you go to the next show, you know all the people on that show too. So you still have friends, but the community is much different. So there's a lot of little standards that we'll have, or everybody knows everybody. So rumors will fly too sometimes, and so you gotta like keep up with the culture. It's like its own culture. So that was like the social struggle that I had to deal with, was kind of feeling like an outsider in a group of people who have been circus since they were born, and they're generational circus. So there's a lot of like things that are like unspoken rules that I had to learn, and the way that they interact with each other is slightly different, and the mannerisms, like I felt like I was always making little mistakes and stuff like that. But then the more new age, I call them like hippie circus, because a lot of them are like yoga, and so they'll make like a circus yoga school and stuff like that. And those type of circus people I fit in better. They're weird, they're different, they're from all over the place. They're not born into it. They got into it. It was a hobby just because they loved it. They weren't just raised into it strictly performing acts since they were 3 years old.
How was it with the social life? Because you said obviously it's very different. But you said there's a tight knit group among the circus, which is something that I was not aware of. But even with that, I imagine it's hard to make friends outside of it. Or you mentioned dating very briefly. How was your experience about making friends, having a social life, looking for a partner? How did that work being in the circus?
That was very difficult in the circus. Trying to date and actually have like a relationship, even with a circus performer, is very difficult unless you're like on the same show for more than just 5 months, which is not often, unless you're in the same act, which you're usually not in the same act permanently unless you're like married. So my first boyfriend was on a little show that I performed at once, but then I was with them for like a month and a half on that show, and then they went and worked a different show, and I worked a different show, and we never were on the same show again ever. And so we were never really in the same state, so it was very hard to keep a relationship. So that relationship fell. The only relationship I had that lasted longer than normal for me was when I was dating someone who was in the circus troupe that I was in, which was good and bad. It was good because we were in the same act, so we were able to stay together longer and not be long distance. But it was negative in the fact that we were in the same act. So if we're fighting, we still have to put up with each other by being in the same act together, and like put our frustrations aside and try to keep it professional and stuff like that. So that was the downside to that. And then trying to date outside of the circus group of people never worked out for me. It doesn't work out for many circus people at all. Even friendships outside of circus is really hard. My closest friend, it was really difficult for us because she went through a really, really rough time in her life, and I couldn't be there for her. I was I was in New York City, I was working and I wasn't near her and I couldn't be around her. And then when I was training and I was stressed out and I was working and she would always want me there and I couldn't be there. And the same thing goes when I'm dating someone. You're long distance most of the time. It's very difficult when they don't understand my lifestyle and that sometimes you get a lot of attention. So there'll be jealousy or, you're working in a show where you're wearing a more revealing costume. And if they're not circus, there could be some jealousy there. Or like, if there's a man in a show and he's dating a girl who's not circus, she's probably going to get jealous because people are just changing backstage, or when you're performing, there'll be like, let's say I was in the act and I was kind of getting to know a guy outside of circus, and it really bothered him when he was watching us training because I was like very physical with the men because we're performing and I'm wearing just a sports bra and shorts and he's lifting me up and he's got hands in awkward places learning how to do new tricks, and that really bothered them. And it's normal for circus. We don't think of that as anything other than a job. Or sometimes like an actress, how like they'll kiss someone on the scene and yet they're not actually dating in real life. Like there's even shows like where you pretend that you're like in love with someone for a romantic style circus act. And like one of my favorite circus acts was a lady who and at the end of the act she would kiss her partner, and they were doing this beautiful romantic act, but they weren't together. They both had separate partners and stuff like that. So it's difficult. Dating in the circus world is just difficult unless you get married. And then when you get married, like a lot of my friends who are married and have children, their life is much more simple. One of my close friends, her husband is a clown. She's like an aerialist, and she would do her aerial act with her husband, helping her with the equipment, holding the rope for her to climb up and stuff like that. And then he would do a clown act, and their little son would come out and do the little clown act with them. So they'd have their son performing. So they're all performing together, and it's so much easier that way. And then you can have you can build an act together with your family and all travel together. That aspect would be nice. I hope my kids enjoy growing up in it. But like I said, I'm taking a hiatus because you are traveling a lot. So the reason I took my hiatus right now and am not performing for a few years is because I don't want to be raising two kids in a hotel room where they can't make friends other than the friends on their circus show. And then they leave after 2 months and never see that friend again for another year. And I just didn't want them to have that. I wanted them to have like one place to be for a little while, very stable, comfortable environment to be while they're babies. Plus, I'm also a single mom, so trying to perform all the time without someone to help me watch the kids would be very difficult. So I'm just going to wait till they're older before I get back into performing, and maybe by then my kids will want to build their own act and start performing with me. And I feel like that would be a dream. Maybe it's something that'll happen one day.
That'd be cool. I wish it does. I hope for you. I'm very interested in how the training works because we only see the surface level. We only see the show, but I know there must be a lot of training because first of all, being a circus performer is not easy, but there's also a lot of risk that's involved in it. Can you tell me the side of the circus that no one knows about, the behind the scenes?
Oh, absolutely. Performing, when you see the performance, you're seeing the tip of like an iceberg. There is so much that goes on behind the scene. When you see a trapeze act, I didn't just walk out and go on the trapeze. I probably spent an hour warming up my muscles, stretching, exercising, trying to get my muscles ready, making sure stretching out my splits and making sure I'm flexible enough and keeping my blood going. And then I stand back and I kind of wiggle while I'm waiting behind the curtain. And then as soon as the curtain opens, it's just like as if I wasn't doing anything. I'm just ready to go. And backtracking to the very beginning, I mean, when I was 12 years old, that's when I really started training for real, when I took it seriously. And I would train. I found a retired trapeze artist. She was one of the best trapeze artists of her day. She was Betty Hutton's stunt double in the movie The Greatest Show on Earth. She was an amazing trapeze artist, amazing. And she trained me. I would go over to her house like every other day, and for 3 hours I would sit in the back, and she trained me on how to train, on how to have that discipline, because it takes discipline. It takes literal blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. I mean, I have pictures of the blood on my hands from learning new tricks on the trapeze. I mean, the blisters, and you don't see backstage me putting on that like we would put like rubbing alcohol or something that would, it stings so bad, but it hardens up the skin enough so it's not, bleeding while you're going out there. Because if you put like Neosporin in a Band-Aid, it stays soggy, and then when you go out there, your hands rip. So I would have to put like all that on my hands and stuff. But I would train and train, and she would have me go on a ballet bar for like an hour doing exercises on flexibility and kicking my leg up and getting strong enough, and going to the gym for hours a day to get the strength I need, stretching like all the time to get flexible enough to do some of the tricks I did in trapeze. Took hours of stretching a week. So I would really have to keep my muscles warm. And for like trapeze, I would spend so much time learning a new trick. I would just try it over and over and over again. We have like a motto: it takes like 2,000 repetitions to train the body. Like when you get a trick right, okay, now it's like 1,999 more times to go before you get it enough to where you're not losing your trick in the ring. So when I would finally get a new trick, we would do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until I can do it without fault, like 10 times in a row before I do it. And sometimes that would take a year to learn a new trick. Sometimes I could learn it in like a week. Sometimes it would take 4 years to learn a trick. There's a trick on unicycle that took me like 6 years to learn, and it was still hard. And I got that down good. But for the high wire, we would train 6 hours a day, like 6 days a week for like 3 months before a performance. And we would start out really low with the wire like close to the ground. And I would just sit on the guy's shoulders, and they would walk back and forth until they could walk back and forth with that weight on their shoulders without falling. Nick would like pull their poles, and they would push them a little bit, shake the wire, because you need to learn how to work under pretty much any conditions. Sometimes you'd work outside and it'd rain, wind. But the biggest thing is he would like move the wire or push our poles, because sometimes when we're walking on the high wire, we've got those long poles that are like rather long, like, and if it hits a wire or something, like if there's something hanging down that it hits or something hits it, you need to not fall. So he would move our poles, our balancing poles, and he would shake the wire. And that came in handy. There was a time when we were in the middle of a pyramid and a huge gust of wind came in. We were in at 10. And so the support beams moved. So like the whole wire was like shaking and moving, and we're in the middle of the pyramid. And next it's like, okay guys, just relax. And we're in there, we're trying like, okay, breathe. And we're breathing through it, and then it finally stopped because the wire was like going crazy. So all those times training when he would like shake the wire, throw pine cones at us, like make up for it. And that took a lot of training. But we would, instead of going right up to a 7-person pyramid 50 feet in the air, we started out doing a 3-person pyramid on the ground where you shake the wire, make sure you don't fall. You can do it 100 times in a row pretty much, and to the point where the guy's feet would bleed. And we would, between practices, because we do 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening, they would sit with their feet in ice buckets to try to keep the swelling down from training so much. But then that's really good when you finally get to performing it, and you're under that pressure of being in the spotlight, hundreds of people looking at you on the stage, the lights and everything like that. An easy trick gets so much harder because you're under stress. And that training really comes in handy, because if you can't do it under pretty much any circumstances, when a little kid throws their toy or something happens and the rigging moves or something like that, you know that you've got it. And the training, we train big time from the trapeze. I would train to the point where the backs of my knees from hanging on the trapeze would bleed. And there was times where I was working on a trick, and the trick was really difficult, and I was struggling with it, and I was performing at the same time, and I would do the trick while performing. And then because I didn't feel like I had it good enough between shows, I would set up my trapeze or my Roman rings, and I would go and practice the trick between shows. And then I'd have to wash the blood off my tights, blow dry them really quick, and get ready to go back out for the next show. So there's a like literal blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, people put in hundreds of hours of work for each act that you see. And the trick that probably looks super easy is something that took them vigorous training to be able to do. Because even just going 4 days without doing your act, and you go do it, it's not usually the best idea. So it takes training and practicing before each show, and there's a lot. And when I say, like I said, blood, sweat, and tears really do go into it. And we would wear through ballet shoes. Like I'd wear little ballet shoes to walk on the wire. And I've gone through like 4 pairs in like a year just from training to the point where the soles would go raw like, and start to break apart. Because we would just, Nick would have us count and we'd do like 40 times walking back and forth every single day before practice. It was like our warm up. And those poles are heavy. They're like 40 pounds. And so it takes a lot of strength to be able to hold them in the positions we hold them and move them like this. It's like we're out there bench pressing like a wire pole, lifting it above our heads and just doing repetition. Like I said, our motto was 2,000 repetitions trains the body. We often wouldn't get to 2,000 before a show, but we would get pretty up there, like 200 times without failing. And you're like, okay, I guess I can do it. We go out and do it. And so it takes a lot.
For a trick like you said, for the pyramid, you said it was really complicated, 7 levels. How long did it take for the whole team to get that down to a level that you can perform it in a show?
It would probably, like I said, about 3 months for people who know how to do it. It would probably take a full year from first time stepping on a wire to actually being able to perform that in holding the pyramid. So like when we had a new guy that we would have to train to hold the pyramid, he would have to do the most work, and we would, like I said, we'd have them out there learning how to walk on the wire first. Then when he can walk on the wire 100 times back and forth, they'd put weights on his shoulders. Then when he can walk back and forth with weights on his shoulders, they'd have me sit on his shoulders. And so it depends on the person. Sometimes I've seen guys learn how to hold a pyramid in like 6 months from start to finish. And then some people, it takes years and years and years of doing it. For me, I had been walking on the wire for years before I finally started to get trained professionally. And it took me about a year of training on a higher level before I could actually have been sent up there to go do that performance. So it takes a lot of time, and it really depends on the person and how much hours you put in each day. But it's like, I'm talking like 6 hours a day, 6 days a week for at least a few months before you can perform a show. But if we were to train somebody who had never done it before and didn't have some kind of outside experience, like with gymnastics or something, it would take like 3 years of training, like 6 days a week before you can get to a point of actually performing. It's a lot of effort. Most of your job is practicing.
I wanted to ask about exactly that, because there's a lot of tricks, especially the one you're saying that you said you did a lot of tricks in the air, which is, I imagine, the scariest ones, the most dangerous ones. In training, I obviously understand that you don't start off that way. How does it work to build it up to a point where you do it without any safety measures? Because I imagine there's safety nets or things that you do in practice while you're not mastering the trick.
No, we just do it lower. See, we would wait. We would, how I said we would walk it back and forth? We would do a 3-person pyramid, like a foot off the ground. When we can do that 100 times without fail, like moving the wire, we had a 10-foot wire. And then we would practice that little pyramid on the 10-foot wire. We never used a net during this practice because we didn't want to create a false sense of security. We wanted to be able to respect that wire at all times. So we wouldn't bring a trick up high until we had mastered it like near the ground. And then they'd have the 2 pyramids together walking with the 2 guys on top of the 4 guys walking without me on top, like on the 10-foot. And then when they finally added me, and then they'd walk back and forth, when we can do it 100 times without any issues, then we'd go up to the 20, 40-foot wires. And then we would be able to do it. It would take a lot of trust in each other, knowing that making sure that none of us feel uneasy before we would do it. We would ask each other, make sure we're okay, because if one of us just for some reason is feeling too nervous or too psyched out by the height, it's best to just not do the trick. You don't have an accident, which we did end up having a big accident. I think it was 2017. We were practicing to build up for a show, and the show was getting really close to the time for the show. And we were practicing an 8-person pyramid. So one girl would stand on the top of the pyramid, and then somebody would come and sit on their shoulders. So it was 8 people. And we were trying to get it ready for the show, but we didn't know if we were going to put it in there yet. So we were still practicing the 7-person pyramid with the chair on my trick. And we go across with the 7-person chair with my trick. And then they build the 8-person pyramid. And halfway when they were out, one of them lost their balance and the whole pyramid fell. And they were 50 feet in the air. And it was the toughest days in my whole entire career, was having to watch that. Because as soon as I saw one of their poles go, I knew the pyramid was going down. It's like, there's actually a video that surfaced out there of it, and you could see me on the platform, and I turn around because I know what's going to happen. And I'm like, I know if I watch this happening, I'm never going to perform again. Like, it's just going to ruin it. Even though I know this is something that can happen, I just don't want that image in my head. And so when that happened, 5 of the people fell to the ground. 3 people caught the wire. 3 people who caught the wire only had bruises. None of them ended up in the hospital, but the 5 on the ground all had to be helicoptered to an ICU. And it was opening night the next day. And this was the highlight act of the show. It was the finale act. And that trick was the highlight of the whole show. And we didn't know if our team was even going to survive. And we had to still somehow come up with an act the next day. It was one of the most difficult, trying times of all of our lifetime. So they fell. One girl broke her back. One guy broke his back. Another one really broke his ankles. Liana, she has like 72 pins in her face now from it. But at this point, we didn't know if they were going to make it. They were getting blood transfusions. They were in the ICU. None of us had slept. We were up all night in the hospitals with them and everything. And it was terrifying. And the news crews were all there. And it was crazy because the news crews were there before the ambulance had even taken them away. Like, they somehow knew from the dispatchers that this had happened. And there was helicopter news crews. We were trying to keep people out. There was interviews. There's even like footage of like the tent, and you can see me walking in the background. Like, it was crazy. And so we had like 4 or 5 live news crew there for the show the next day talking about it. And we were all a bundle of nerves, and we had to just come up with an act last minute. And so we had the 3 guys who caught the wire, and then me, and then Nick's wife. And that was all we had for our act. So we had to come up with tricks to do last minute when we didn't have our team, and we didn't even know if they were going to survive yet or not. They were all still in critical condition. And so we came up and we just did some of our most basic tricks. And suddenly, even though these are the most basic tricks that we use for like training, and it's just like a 3-person pyramid, and I walked out and I did a little split on the wire and I'd go up, they became the most difficult trick I've ever done in my entire life. Like, I was shaking. Just walking on the wire was like horrifying, trying to walk out like after what had happened. And it was one of the most difficult times. But by the grace of God, they all did survive, and almost all of them actually got back to performing, believe it or not.
Wow.
And they had to. One guy there, he was a big aerialist. Unfortunately, because of what I'd gone through, he doesn't have the ability to do as much because he broke his back and his ankles. But he was able to continue performing professionally. But he never returned to the wire. A couple people didn't, and it was a hard decision. Nick's sister still did, and Nick's mother still got back into wire walking, but it took them 4 years to be able to do that. And it was probably one of the hardest points in my career, but it makes you respect it. And like I said, when we step foot on that wire, we know what the risks are, and we still take it. There's people who, a lot of the times, though, when circus accidents happen, it's rigging failure. Like, they're like an aerial stilt's hanging down. They're hanging from one point. If for some reason that point breaks, they're falling to the ground. And so that's where most accidents come from in circus, because you train the act so much and you start out so little, like low, and doing basic things till you master it before you build up. So usually by the time you're doing these really big, scary feats, you've already mastered them so much you can practically do them blindfolded. It's usually the equipment, something going wrong with the equipment, that causes the worst issues. But this one, unfortunately, was just a fluke thing, and it's hard. But
Yeah.
like I said, they all survived, and it was a miracle because it was serious injuries that they all endured.
Well, thank God for that.
Oh yeah.
That's crazy that you had to perform the next day, knowing that some of your friends might die while you were on the show. And it's a reminder that, like, even though circus performers are amazing what they do and you're amazing at what you do and you don't fail a whole lot, it's still, the risk is still there, and it's very real and dangerous, which is something that from the outside, you never see. Really, maybe a small failure here and there, but you don't see all the practice where a lot of the dangerous stuff happens because you're not quite ready, or it's just a reminder to me, at least, to the very least, that, like, this is real, the risk is real, and to entertain people, you go through great lengths.
Yep. It was a rewarding career, though. It was just being able to perform and go out there, do your act, and then get down, and hundreds of people are like applauding you, and that feeling is an amazing feeling. And I live for performing. I love it. I can barely talk to people in a group of friends, and like if I go to like a party or something like that, I'm so like antisocial. I get so shy and I can't talk to people. But you put me in front of a stage in front of 500 people or more, and it comes naturally to me. And performing is something I've always really, really enjoyed. And even though that there's that the adrenaline rush is rewarding too. So even though it's scary, sometimes that adrenaline rush of either doing something dangerous or doing something, being nervous by performing, you don't want to mess up in front of all these people, and you're doing something like that takes a lot of work, and you put your life into a trick, and you go out there and you do it, and everybody applauds you. It's so rewarding. It's that adrenaline rush. It's something that I live for, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to become a circus performer and become to the level that I was. And I was performing in New York City, and our act was the final act of the show, which is like the big thing. And I felt successful. And when growing up, I felt like I couldn't do anything. Like I was failing school. And I was like, and people were telling me like I won't amount to anything. And then here I was, like 10 years later, performing on the top of the 7-person pyramid in New York City. And Whoopi Goldberg was at our show. We had several famous people. The girl from American Horror Story, the older lady, she was there.
Okay.
And then there was like I met a lot of famous people. John Legend, and I met his wife, Chrissy Teigen. She even put a video of our pyramid on her Snapchat story. And like I had a couple of my friends going like, "Hey, Chrissy Teigen was at your show." I'm like, "Really?" And they showed me that they put up my thing. Then the next day she came, and I got to meet her little daughter, and we all took a picture with her. So you make a lot of famous friends too in the circus world, because it's like an entertainment industry. So you get to meet a lot of people. And plus Nick was pretty famous and successful, so he got to know a lot of people like firsthand. One thing that's good about circus people, because we do travel a lot, and when you're in one place short periods of time, you learn how to make friends really, really fast. So it can be easy to make a lot of really good friends in the circus world, and then you go 2 years without seeing them, and you see them again, and it's just like you never left for 2 years. It's just like you're best friends again. And so it's like the community can be really amazing, even though sometimes it can be intimidating. It can be very fulfilling, I guess. You get a lot of good people.
That's great. So you grew up in a normal family, like you said, a townie family, like you called it, and you had the circus life for a while too. What's the biggest lesson that you've taken from being in the circus, moving to all these different places, that I guess you wouldn't have learned if you hadn't been in that environment?
I learned how to adapt really quickly. So I learned how to adapt to different environments, different people, because like even when you go from state to state, there can be like a mild culture shock, and the way that people can be different sometimes from state to state. And learning how to like I said, make friends really quickly, adapt to being in a new place really quickly, learning where all the grocery stores are really quickly, and learning how to live out of a suitcase for half the year makes me value material things less, because I know that I don't need all these fancy things in my house if I can live just fine out of a suitcase for 6 months. So that was one thing that I really enjoyed from it. And then, like I said, the people skills that I got from it, because I am really shy, but I did gain a lot of people skills, especially because there was times where we would sign autographs, or I'd run into people who recognize me from the show, and it's really nice to talk to people and get to know them, and making friends really quickly was good. It helped me break out of my shell of being really, really shy and introverted, to being able to make a lot of friends really easily, learning things really quickly. A lot of circus people are really good at like learning new things very fast, because we learn new acts all the time, and each act gives you skills that would help you learn a different act. And so that part's fun, and being able to travel and see a lot of places, it helped me appreciate that the ability to even be able to do that, and learning different cultures, being around different groups of people. I really value that now that I have got that experience to learn about different cultures, because pretty much anywhere I go, I'll meet someone, they're like, yeah, I live here, and I'm like, oh, I worked there for a while, and then we'll start talking all about the restaurant that we all went to and stuff like that, and it's just somebody I randomly meet and stuff like that. So I learn a lot about different cultures.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Almost False podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more interviews like this. If you found this content valuable, please share it with a friend. It really helps us out a lot, and hopefully it will help them too. If you want to be on the show, you can go to almostfalse.net and submit your story there. We would love to hear from you. With that being said, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and stay blessed.